Peter Blackman was a political activist, writer, and poet who died in 1993, aged 84. He was born in Barbados and moved to England in 1937 to study theology. Many sources have him as studying at Durham University, but he actually studied at St Augustine's Theological College in Canterbury. He was training to be a priest, and that degree was accredited by Durham University, as many theological colleges at that time were. However, when he went to Gambia to practice as a priest, he ended up in an argument with the senior members of the Anglican Church there because of pay inequalities between black and white priests, which he tried to contest and challenge, but which he failed, and he left disillusioned. He returned to England in 1937, becoming active in many political and anti-colonial organisations and also joining the Communist Party. During the Second World War, he worked as a factory worker and was also active in many of the BBC Caribbean radio broadcasts at that time during the Second World War. Following the Second World War, with the advent of the Cold War over the 1940s and the 1950s, his work was blacklisted, and he was also put under surveillance by the MI5 because of his work in various anti-racist and anti-colonial organisations. And he also experienced racism, which blocked his work from being published and presented by the BBC. He continued to work as a railway engineer and gained a reputation for helping fellow workers with literacy and writing, using his skills that he'd gained as a political activist and as a priest and a student over the late 1930s and into the 1940s. Sometimes writing has the power to reach out and put a finger on your soul, and I think that Peter Blackman's writing and his poetry in particular has the power to do that. He describes writing and poetry as, I quote, "to weave beauty out of one's own lived experience." And he writes of the roots of probably his most famous poem, My Song is for All Men, quote, "If I appear to be moved, I am moved, not by what I have said, but by the memories that it brings back. My song is for all men came out of actual experience. All my writing is what I call lived experience. There were two incidents leading up to the writing of that poem that particularly moved me. One was a visit to the then unresurrected part of Warsaw, which used to be called the ghetto. I was there on the occasion of a conference, quite by chance for me. Among the people who were there was a very distinguished English intellectual, Jewish by origin, the late Professor Levy. I remember him walking with him through the ghetto, a grown man of 50, nearly 60. He stooped down and he picked up a Torah, all bloodied over, and he turned his head away, and I had to weep with him, not because of the Torah, but because he had been so hurt. He was a living representative of millions who had gone that way. This put Blackman, in his words, quote, firmly and irrevocably on the side of a lifelong struggle against everything that fascism means, in whatever form it comes. And he was writing at that time, and he was speaking, in fact, in 1980 at an event that was focusing on art against racism and art against fascism. And those words, I think, speak to me and will speak to many people who are of Jewish heritage, whose extended family either suffered through the Shoah, the Holocaust, or through other forms of anti-Semitism. There is another reason that Peter Blackman's work moved me. I came to his work through the writing and the autobiography of anti-racist educator Chris Searle, who quoted a passage from the same speech that I've just quoted from. He in particular focused on a passage where Blackman talks about the ordinary and the beauty in the ordinary. As someone who's interested in thinking about culture and thinking about education and what value means in education, thinking about the ordinary is, I think, an important starting point for all of us when we think about what culture means and what culture has importance. One of the definitions of poetry that Blackman offers in the same speech is that poetry takes meaning and that beauty resides in the ordinary. Too often, the left and people who are interested in being active politically on the left become, quote, focused on posturing, becoming names and important people, eminences. What Blackman ascribes to the left could equally be ascribed to many academics, because I think the structure of the academic profession and the university itself focuses on encouraging and fostering us to focus on becoming names, becoming eminences, seeing prestige as what matters, and forgetting perhaps that what really matters is the ordinary, the everyday, the value of culture as it is lived by everyday people. Becoming names is what universities seek to encourage academics to be. And yet what matters, what really matters, is the ordinary. Excellence does not reside in elites or elitism or even elite institutions. To quote Blackman again, the search for special treatment, for being exceptional, is something that filters down through the activity of all of us. And in the long run, that is what, and only what, fascism is about. The fight to be exceptional, the master race. Instead, Blackman continues, what we must try and do is get at the ordinary, and so work that without any suspicion of deterioration, we see in the ordinary and out of the ordinary that we bring excellence without elitism. That is what we want. In the ordinary is the excellent. The ordinary people, the ordinary men and women who go to work every day. It doesn't matter what they do, out of them comes excellence. Not can come, but comes excellence. But as soon as we begin to introduce elitism, we destroy not only excellence, we destroy the ordinary out of which comes excellence. As a sociologist of education, I'm interested in thinking about elites and elite education and the problems that are created by a system that is organized around thinking that culture needs to be elite, that it needs to be segregated from broader society. And what we haven't had, and what I think Blackman's words remind us, is that really what matters in culture is the everyday, is the culture of the ordinary. And that means an education system which we've never really had, because we've never really had an education system that values the culture of the ordinary, that values the culture of the working class, the multiracial working class that we have in Britain. Blackman's words give us ways of thinking about education afresh, anew, give us ways of thinking about what the ordinary means and why it is important to value that, and that should be the basis of what structures our view of culture, of what structures our view of education, and what it should be. Blackman writes powerfully about the cultural and literary value of the St. James's Bible, and says, I quote again, that recognizing this beauty, the beauty of the words of the St. James Bible in particular, has, quote, absolutely nothing to do with believing in the story of the creation as set down in the book of Genesis. Blackman also wrote 2 poems about London, one which decries and is furious about the racism he and other black people experienced there in the 1930s and 40s when he first moved to the city. He wrote another where he talked about being at ease, being at home even, in the city which was also the home of Johnson, of Donne, and of Blake. I think what this allows us to think about, if we link this back to these ideas about the ordinary, but also about thinking about elite educational institutions, about elite forms of culture, is what we find within the existing framework, within the existing culture, within the existing practices of elite institutions, which, despite their oppressive nature, can still be liberatory, can still be emancipatory, and can still be put to use in the cause, perhaps, of the ordinary. That, I think, is a message which resonates powerfully in the work of Blackman, and is something which I think, if we want to change these institutions where some of us teach, some of us work, research, where we learn, what can we take, what can we salvage of what is there? What do we want to carry on? What do we want to change and challenge? And that means thinking about the elements of culture which, despite the fact that they reside within elite institutions, are still something which can be taken, which are powerful, which are beautiful, and which can be used in the cause, perhaps, of something else that is not elitism, that is not the status quo, that does not preserve or reproduce forms of oppression, racism, in whatever form that takes. There are many reasons why the work of Peter Blackman and his connection to Durham, though slight, should be remembered. His words give us thought on poetry, on racism, on colonialism, on what it means to be black in Britain, and he knew through his political life, through his literary and intellectual life, key figures in the history of Black Britain and in the history of and in Black history internationally. That means people like Paul Robeson, whose tour he organised in 1948. It means meeting in 1949 W.E. Du Bois at a conference in Paris. And he also wrote a poem commemorating the life of Claudia Jones, who founded the Notting Hill Carnival. And I want to quote again a short passage from that poem. She said, "I walk with the humble, yet not in humility. We scale the winds, my feet shall be no swifter than their feet. My limbs shall share no strength that is not theirs. When we move mountains." I think you can hear again the idea that he drew out and focused on later, that in the ordinary lies power, in the ordinary lies beauty, and that those of us who seek to change things must follow that path of the humble, must find that path and try and stick to it. Despite the fact that Blackman was blacklisted, that his work was pushed out of the public sphere by the state and the BBC, his words still speak and resonate afresh with many of us now, thanks in part to the publication in 2013 of an anthology of his poetry by Smokestack Books. I think Durham, both the university and the festival, should celebrate his writing. When you think of universities and the names that are remembered on buildings or in scholarships and prizes, there are many who have contributed less than Peter Blackman did. Many who did not see the value in the ordinary, so much as the value in their name being remembered. His work also highlights the links between black thinkers, intellectuals, and students whose names and lives have often been overlooked in the history of universities and in the history of Britain more widely. What other black students studied in or at or in accredited colleges affiliated to Durham? What were their legacies and intellectual lives? What memories have been forgotten and are not told? And why are those histories not told? Why are these associations with Durham only being uncovered now? These are questions that I think we can raise more widely within the university and beyond when we're thinking about histories of race and higher education and indeed the present. I think it's a good place to end with leaving the final words to Peter Blackman himself, and in particular the essay we've both drawn on today, Art Against Racism and Fascism. And I'll quote from there. "The older people will tell the younger, it has been tried. It is always being tried. It's still being tried, and it's not easy. But don't get disturbed by things like St. Paul's, Bristol, or Brixton. Don't get disturbed even by the police. We can beat the police. We can beat all this nastiness. I am confident that we can beat this nastiness worldwide and in our localities and nationwide in England or elsewhere. But it needs very careful thought, not sloganizing, not picking up people's words. And if you will allow me to stop here, I'll leave the thought to you to keep trying."
When Peter Blackman died in August 1993, we lost a kind of walking archive of 20th century black British history. He began his political activist career as a member of the League of Coloured Peoples, Britain's first kind of anti-racist civil rights organisation, and edited their journal The Keys. He was also involved in the kind of radical socialist trade union organisation, the Negro Welfare Association. During the Second World War, he spoke as part of the landmark BBC series Caribbean Voices. He was a comrade of Claudia Jones, founder of the West Indian Gazette, and also organiser of the Notting Hill Carnival. And you can still find his work, his poetry, that is, being reprinted in Black Power magazines like Black Liberator in the 1970s. Right up to the 1980s, he's speaking at anti-fascist and anti-racist events. We're used to thinking of black British history as a collection of surprising or untold stories, but Blackman's life, his poetry and his political activism are a reminder that this should be an ordinary story, an ordinary part of the way we think about Britain's history. As a man, a poet and a political activist, Peter Blackman was understated and self-consciously ordinary. His life is a testament to the fact that black British history should be ordinary, part of the way we think about kind of ordinary British history. Blackman's life connects so many different historical tangents that we're used to thinking of as separate. The history of the Second World War, the history of kind of the British working class in the 20th century, the history of Caribbean migration to Britain both before and after the Second World War, and as well as a struggle against fascism, both in the Second World War and afterwards, in the kind of 70s and 80s. Blackman often wrote about ordinary people and about himself as a kind of ordinary figure. And in some ways, what that reminds us of is he is one of many black poets, black workers, black political activists in Britain. And one wonders in that case how much other ordinary history is out there yet to be discovered.